Hello, everybody, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Today, we are leaving behind the Cloak and Dagger series. I've said mostly everything that I really need to say on it, and I think that maybe not everything that could be said, but at a certain point, I think I'd start getting a little bit repetitive and getting a little bit redundant, or going into really fine detail minutia that really should be left up to all of you individual dungeon masters, game MCs, storytellers, etc., etc. All that stuff at this point, that's for you to go fill out and start crafting and building your own adventures. But does that mean we're done here? No, not by a long shot, my friends. Not by a long shot indeed. For today, we are going to be getting started on another games type series, game style, game adventure, whatever you want to call it, however you want to slice it. But it's this thing that I'm starting here was the overall impetus for me starting this channel. In fact, it was part of the basis of me putting together my first episode on here at the Gamer's Den for making better campaigns, and that was the subject of putting details into your campaign. It's that long-winded story I went on about that god-awful martial arts campaign. But that's the crux of what we're talking about here today. Putting together a good martial arts themed campaign. A good kung fu fighting styled campaign. So, what's the most important, broad, and overarching thing that you need to have? It needs to feel like a kung fu setting. It needs to feel like those awesome old 70s, 80s, corny as hell but still fun Chinese and Japanese martial arts and kung fu movies. We need to have that feeling, that type of aesthetic that they have, and to really get yourself in the mindset and get the juices flowing in the right direction for setting up this kind of a campaign, you should go and watch some of those. Or if you don't want to watch the older ones, there's plenty of contemporary titles out there that still capture that feel. Most notably, at least for me, Man with the Iron Fist, starring the RZA. It was a fantastic movie. It had all that awesome camp, but it had modern martial arts flair and action that's combined with that old school 70s aesthetic for these old kung fu flicks. And it was great. It was absolutely fantastic, and really helps to put you in the mindset for putting together a proper martial arts campaign. Now, other things that you can do to prep and get ready for this, on top of going back and rewatching these older or newer flicks. Another one that comes to mind is Kung Fu Killer, also called Kung Fu Jungle, with Donnie Yen. Absolutely fantastic. I definitely recommend, just not even just for the purposes of putting together a campaign. It's just a fantastic movie all the way around. If you like martial arts, if you like action flicks, it's definitely well worth the watch. But it does work especially well for getting you in the mindset of how to put together that feeling. Now, when you're putting together this style of a campaign, in order to capture that feeling, you need to create a setting and a feel where all these different hand-to-hand martial warriors are putting their skills to the test, or wanting to put their skills to the test. They're going out and have themes of seeking out stronger, better opponents, wanting to test their martial arts style, their martial systems, their methods of combat against proponents of other schools, against masters and students of these various other martial arts traditions. And it's this clash of differing styles. Now, to get that put together, some of it's going to be more just more flavor, more aesthetics, and how you're describing things. For example, you don't have to create 18, 20, 30 different variations of the monk character class, but when they go to do their flurry of blows, if they're from the Crane School of Kung Fu, they're using more kicks and large sweeping motions with their arms, imitating imitating a crane's movements. If they're coming from the tiger style school of kung fu, they're using claw swiping motions to attack their opponents. If they're from a school that uses weapons, they will use their weapons as part of their flurry attacks, and that's primarily what they'll do. Also, a minor tweak that you can make to the class that really won't break you in terms of creating multiple different kung fu styles for the monk character class is just to create some variation by changing up which weapons the monks are proficient with. Because certainly looking at ancient China, there are plenty of martial arts traditions, different temples and schools that existed that made use of different kinds of swords. And while to a certain extent a sword is a sword is a sword, there are still enough variations between different types of swords that you're going to be doing some very different things. For example, a Japanese katana is certainly much more suited to slashing attacks. Not that you can't thrust with it, but it is absolutely an effective and very forgiving cutting weapon just because of the overall shape and the blade geometry. It's a fairly thick blade, so when you do make a cut, even if your edge alignment's not perfect, it still cuts real effectively. Versus other cutting weapons, different swords are designed for different things, but just by focusing on these slightly different designs, you can emphasize different aesthetics in a martial arts style or system. And by changing up which weapons a different monk school is proficient with, you create different flavors and different aesthetics right there without having to do too much more than just changing up some proficiencies. Another thing that you can do is just to take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort to adapt the various character classes into this kind of martial arts themed setting. Monks certainly blend right into this easily enough, and you can certainly make fighters blend into it. Fighters are definitely more weapon focused rather than straight up unarmed combat using their fists and their feet. But again, you can just tweak that a little bit to where if you take a look at in Pathfinder, their weapons proficiency, their weapon group proficiencies, you can certainly make it set up to where they have a monk-oriented group that includes their bare hands. You can do all sorts of little things like that, and certainly, again, looking at any part of our own ancient history here on Earth, we see that there are so many different martial traditions that don't include barehanded methodologies of attack, like you would find with, take the Shaolin school of martial arts, Shaolin Kung Fu. They certainly do have incredible skills barehanded, but they also use weapons like the twin hook swords, their bow staff, very many weapons that they make use of as part of their tradition. But that's just a couple of little minor ways. You can even include the spell casting classes, where instead of they're tapping into arcane energies flowing through the tapestries of existence, they're tapping into and using chi magic. All it is, you're just changing a word from arcane magic to ley lines to they're just gathering and harnessing their internal chi, and it's manifesting as this seemingly magical effect. Sorcerers kind of blend in a little bit more with this because they're described more as having an inborn latent power, but again, it's easy enough to adapt mages, even clerics, to this style of gameplay. And of course, if you really want to immerse players even more, start looking up different names and place names from different languages, like taking China again as an example, taking a look at different names of towns in Mandarin and Cantonese, and looking back in their ancient history for the various empire names throughout their history. You can easily start coming up with different names of towns and villages, so that way you're not relying on Town 1 and Town 2 and Fortress 1 and 3, Fortress B5 and all of that kind of garbage. Just, again, putting in that little bit of effort to just look up Mandarin place names, Cantonese place names, Chengdu Village, Xiaopei, the Xiaopei province, things like that. Um, I believe those are real places. I just might be mixing up whether or not they're villages, cities, or provinces. But again, it's just a little bit of effort there, and it does more to immerse your players into this style of a setting. And once players know the aesthetic, they'll certainly help you by leaning into this a bit, especially if they're more experienced and veteran players. They will do a lot to create their characters, and the backstory they create for their characters you can certainly use to incorporate and help build this style of a setting. And it just, again, it's just trying to capture that aesthetic and feel is step one. There's certainly many other things and many other themes that you can do to get a hold of this and get this feeling down right. But number one is capturing that feel and using the various resources out there for capturing that particular kung fu feeling in order to get your players in the right mindset. As a martial arts themed adventure is and certainly should be different from your other classical Dungeons and Dragons styled adventures. It should feel more like the story of Journey to the West with the Monkey King and everything, and that little group of adventurers that went along on this journey of enlightenment. Uh, that's the kind of thing that you should be looking to capture and incorporate into this style of setting. So, look up Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism, especially. All these different Eastern philosophies and ways of looking at and examining life and enlightenment will again do a lot to further enhance that particular feeling for this kung fu style adventure. Now, what kind of adventure specifically you're putting together once you have this broad aesthetic, again, that's kind of up to you. You can certainly still have a cloak and dagger styled sort of adventure in a kung fu styled setting, in a martial arts themed setting. Again, you just need to put a little bit effort into it rather than there's 89 dead bodies and each of them was killed in a different way. You need to go a little bit further than that. Certainly mystery, a whole school, a whole temple of martial art adepts and masters murdered. I mean, that definitely fits within the theme. It certainly this is something you find in various anime and, of course, old kung fu movies. But you need to go a little bit further than everyone was murdered a different way, and that's just not very good to begin with. But if you focus on things like, oh, this person has wounds that are reminiscent of an axe, and you actually find the axe head still attached to the broken part of the shaft, and it's got this scorpion styled engraving on it. This other person over here, their body's riddled with arrows, and the arrows are red with black fletchings. Distinctive little details like that emphasize something unique, something that the players will remember. So when they find that archer with those red arrows with the black fletching, they'll be able to connect that person to that scene. And also because this person was either single-handedly or part of a group, however you want to style the story, because they went through as part of a small number or just a single person and killed an entire temple, an entire school of martial arts students and masters. The players will know to tread carefully around this person. And every good martial arts story should have an encounter with the big bad, that big ruthless bastard, that utterly evil or insanely skilled and impossibly competent martial arts master that just absolutely wrecks the players, the protagonists, and makes their lives hell that first encounter. And again, part of this theme and feel is if you do have that first encounter where the players just absolutely have their shops wrecked, that's where you take a moment and go, the big bad just looks at them in disgust or just hides them as they lay there bleeding on the ground and just doesn't bother finishing them. They're not worth the effort anymore. Or he sees, or they see, a potential for them to maybe get better, to where they could provide a better challenge for him, entertain him, or truly test his skills. As again, that's one of the overarching themes you find consistently repeated throughout all these old kung fu stories is martial arts masters, martial arts adepts, and students wanting to test their skills against stronger and stronger opponents. Another classic example of this is Ryu from the Street Fighter series. I mean, it's basically he travels the world. He's just a wandering vagabond, and he's this wandering martial arts master that is going around and just utterly kicking the crap out of these legendary fighters all across the globe. And again, that's the type of thing you should incorporate. That's the type of feeling you should have in a kung fu styled game like this. But that's just the overall aesthetic. Actually planning that out and putting this sort of thing together does take a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, and just a slightly different way of looking at things. Again, it boils down largely to aesthetic, but you need to work within these themes. And one of the most important ways is to put together a martial arts tournament. But we'll talk about that for next time. For now, I have been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. If you've been enjoying this video or any of the other content I put out here so far, please consider giving us a like and a subscribe here. Can always use more subscribers, always use more viewers. And if you do subscribe to the channel, make sure you click the bell icon there, because YouTube's not always the best at notifying people when the places they subscribe to, the channels they subscribe to, upload new content. But by clicking the bell icon there, you'll get notified the next time I upload more good content here to the channel. Once again, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. You all have yourselves a good night.